What's up, my Blender people? You are about to see an excerpt from one of our Skillshare classes where we teach you how to use Blender's smoke and fire system to make Iron Man look like he's blasting off. If you like the model we're using here, stay tuned to the end and find out how to get it for free.
So the thrusters of Iron Man, I'm not even sure what it looks like. Let me check. So this is basically the kind of beam that just shoots out of the shoes of Iron Man. To start off, we need to define where the objects are that are going to emit the shading, emit the smoke, right? So let's move this background down. We can make it look like he's already flying off. I'm going to select the camera, press G, and just zoom out a little bit. Move this down, just so we can see the flame coming out, or the thrust. So we want there to be smoke coming out of his shoes. So let's select our cursor and move it to the shoes. So just click on the bottom of the feet, press Shift A, mesh, and we want the shape to be something like maybe a circle. Scale it down like so, and press Tab and F, press Ctrl A and apply all transforms. Right mouse, set origin to geometry. There we go. Now go to Object, Quick Effects, and let's go to Quick Smoke. Yes, Quick Smoke. Now it instantly adds a smoke domain, which is something we need in order for Blender to render out the smoke and stuff. So if you now run the animation, you can see the smoke simply goes up, and it's smoke, it's not fire or anything. But if we change some stuff, we can actually make this look incredible. So I'm going to go select my smoke domain, press Tab, press A, and I'm going to press G, Z, move this down. We don't want smoke to come above the feet anywhere, so we can just move this all down. Press S, scale this up a little bit, so we can get some nice, maybe some bounces from the floor or anything. So press G and Z, move this down like this. S, Shift Z, just move this up a little bit. And you have to remember that we are going to use one smoke domain for both our objects, so both thrusters of the feet. So we need to make this cover the entire part of what's going to be smoke or fire, right? So this will do the trick. There we go. So all of the settings for the smoke domain you can find in the physics properties tab right there. So this is domain type, resolution subdivision is very important. After every change you make in either the emission object or the domain, you will need to change the resolution division in order for those changes to actually be applied, right? So let's play it. Still smoke that wants to go up, but it can't go up because that's already the limit of our smoke domain. So let's go back. And let's first of all set this domain to an adaptive domain, which basically means it starts small and it will increase its size whenever the smoke is about to touch the domain, right? So now we're going to have to select our emission object. Just like that. So select it, and we want some velocity going down. Actually, we want a lot of velocity to go down. So what we're going to do is just change the Z value to like -60. Let's see what happens. So make sure to select your smoke domain and of course change the resolution. Otherwise it's not going to apply those changes. So right now, boom, incredible force down already. So 60 miles, or what is it? Meter per second is, I think, the unit that is used by default. Yeah, it's about, I think you can do it like times 3.6 to get kilometers an hour. So it's quite fast. Now you can see that the smoke is coming out of the sides of this object. And that's actually because our smoke domain is still at like 32 resolution divisions. For a final render, I'd recommend 128 or 256. Depending on the amount of details you need. We can also select our emission object and change the flow source from 1.5 to 1, which basically means the distance of which is emitted. Let's change the resolution division, so that already changes it a little bit. If we set this to 6.4, It already becomes a little bit smaller, so play this out now. And you can see a nice thick thruster coming out. And I actually love already how this looks. So we don't even have like materials and stuff yet, so it's gonna be fun. Right, for now, I'm going to set this background and scale this up a little bit, by the way, because it's not reaching the upper left side. Scale this up and turn this into a collision object, and this is a plane. So do we have to change anything? Nah, it should be fine. So let's replay this at a resolution division of 6.2. And it should be interacting with our plane now, which it isn't. So let's see what happens. Our plane, we can try to turn off single-sided for once, because it is a plane and that sometimes just adds some difficulties with the simulations. All right, so that's not working yet. Let's see what we need. We can also just try to extrude this. So select your object, press tab, press A and E, and just extrude that down a little bit. So now, or sorry, just scale that up. So now you have some thickness in your plane. Make sure to shade this smooth and set your normals in the object data properties to auto smooth. There we go. Now let's try again. Let's see what happens. Go to your domain, change the resolution division, and let's replay that. So it still looks like it's going right through, which is weird. Oh, it's not weird at all. It's not weird at all. I'm just being a retard. I'm going to Ctrl Z this a few times. I want the thickness of the plane gone. The thing is, we actually need this to be fluid simulation. Set this to, what is it again? Let me think for a second. This has to be effector, and it has to be a collision. So if I'm right, this should be flow, fluid, flow, smoke inflow. So this is going to be an effector collision of the fluid. That should do the trick, right? And it's planar, so this is a plane. So that's what I was looking for a little while ago. So now let's find out if I now finally know what I'm doing. Yes, look at it. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing? Yes. Okay, so that's looking dope. I actually want some of that to be seen in my camera. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. We can even make this a vertical image. That could be way easier, actually. So to change the proportions of your camera, go to your scene output properties, and you can just change it, for example, the other way around. So like this. And that's better. So now we can zoom in a little bit more. Like this. That's looking nice. Move this up like so. And now if we go to render view, we can actually see some smoke coming out already. So that's amazing. So for Iron Man, there is no real smoke. I may just add a little bit because I love the way it looks, okay? Right, so from this point, my audio got a little bit weird. So I'm just talking over it right now. So I'll talk you through the steps anyway. So what I'm doing here is just selecting some options in the smoke domain. And you can see that by default, the smoke domain is set on only smoke. And we want to set this to fire and smoke, because that's actually how we get the flame in there. So if it's set on only smoke, then there's no real way to get fire. And then you get these extra options, fuel, density, temperature, and those will all change the way your flame looks and the way your smoke reaction is going to act out. So make sure that after making changes, you change the resolution of your smoke a little bit to get those changes to be applied. And we're just playing the smoke simulation for a few frames to actually get that smoke out there. Right, next up, we've got the materials. So there's one material principled volume that is automatically applied to your smoke domain. So the smoke domain takes care of the actual way the smoke looks and the fire looks as well. So there's one node that controls the fire and the smoke. Right, so first things first, there is a little bit of stuff that we still want to change. There is one principal volume node. You can see here on the left, there's one smoke domain as well. In the end, we want to have two thrusters from one from each feet, of course, one from each foot. But right now we're going to worry about the emission object for a second, because we can still change some values, right? So for example, the Z velocity, we can change this to maybe 100, minus 100, just to get a little bit more speed out of the thruster, right? And that can change the entire look of the flame. And of course, to do that, we can have a small look at our smoke domain. So let's go to solid view first. And we are first going to copy this thruster to the other foot. So select your object and then press Shift D, press G, Y, and just move that to the right. There we go. So right now you can't really see anything yet, and that's because we have to update our smoke domain. And the reason why we're doing it like this is because that way the thrusters won't look exactly the same. So the other way you would do this is to just duplicate the baked object, but now change the resolution division by 1 or 2 and go back in your timeline to the first frame and then play your animation. And in that case, it will render out your new simulation. So it's going quite fast actually, so that's really nice. And you can already see what's going on there. So now we've got two thrusters and they are still quite big, and that's because our resolution is still set quite low. So it's set on 66 right now. So let's see how it actually looks. So there's double the smoke coming from these thrusters, and it's really nice because they have some kind of feedback from the ground, right? They collide. So let's go to our principled volume right now. And there's actually a lot of stuff that we can change in the principled volume shader. So to do this, we need to be in rendered view, otherwise we can't really see what we're changing. And there's a few options that really help getting this fire out there that we're going to discuss in just a second. If you look at this, we want the thruster to be kind of, it isn't going to be real fire, but it's going to be more like a thruster, right? Like a beam. So first things up is change the black body intensity, swipe it all the way up, and you can see it stops at 1, but you can manually type in a larger value, for example 50, which is quite high. So we can actually change this back to something like 20 or 30, and it's looking way better. But it still looks a little sloppy, a little bit chaotic, right? So we can actually change a lot in the principled volume to make this look like we actually want. And make a little bit more space, so swipe that screen to the left. And now we're going to press Shift A, search, and we're going to search for a volume info. And it basically gives us the information of the volume. So that is being created in the simulation. We've got density, flame temperature. Density basically defines the density of the smoke at a given point, and the flame actually defines where the fire should be. So that is the one option that you can have if you change the emission object from smoke only to fire and smoke. So we've got that right now, and once you connect that to the black body intensity to define where the flame is, it's going to be very dull. So it's not going to be quite bright. So we want to increase this brightness. That's step 1. So press Shift A and search for math node, swap that in between and change the value. So if you're going to up this value, then you can see that it's just going to add another value to your fire intensity, so to the black body intensity. So set this at 10 for now. We'll change that later. We can even change the setting from add to multiply later, but that's something we can worry about in a second. So first things first, we're going to change the color ramp. So Shift A and search for color ramp and swipe it in between and swipe the black to the right and just see what happens. So this is something where we can define how much of the flame is going to be visible and what part of the flame is going to be cut off. It's right now, it's not doing that much. You can see some slight changes, especially when we decrease the add node. Of course, if we have the add node set on 10, then those changes are going to be very slight of the color ramp, because it's just going to add that 10 value to a value from 0 to 1. So the value is going to be anywhere from 10 to 11. So of course that's not going to be that visible, and we will change that later to multiply, but right now it is nice to see what it does to our fire. So we can add another point there and swipe it to the right. We've set it on constant right now, and we're going to set this to a little bit of a more grayish color, right? So it's a little bit more bright at the centers, something like that. And swipe that back value to the left, and we can even change this back to B-spline to get a little bit more of that transform value, so a little bit more of a smooth transition, right? So next up, we can actually add a new color ramp, because we want to use the density of the volume node as well, because that can define the density of the smoke, but we can also use that for the density of the flame. So if we want a part of that smoke to just become part of the flame, then we can use that as well. And we can use that dissolve value of the flame to actually cut off the flame at some point. So let's actually duplicate. We can add a color ramp, or we can duplicate it. I'm going to left click this one, press Shift D, move that down. And we need to reset that, but first select your math node and duplicate that and swipe that to the bottom as well, because obviously we're going to have to use another math node and connect it in between, because that's where we want this color ramp to connect to the bottom socket. First things first, click the little arrow and reset the color ramp to its default settings, and just collect the density to the vector and the color to the value. There we go, that is the basic setup. And now we can change the color ramp in the way we want. So this is going to use the density value of our smoke, and we can basically change the cutoff of that smoke. So once again, it's not doing that much yet. We'll get to that in a little while when we change the add nodes to multiply. So let's check the density of the smoke. We want there to be a little bit of smoke visible in the final simulation, right? Just to show that it is it's a reaction, a fire is being created, there's fuel being burned, and I just like the way the smoke looks while it reflects off the ground surface. So at this point I'm trying to figure out why there isn't that much changing, and that's because we've got our color ramps, or sorry, our nodes set to add, changes to multiply, and there's going to be a huge difference in what's happening, but because right now it is multiplying all our values of the actual color ramps. So now you can see it's very dull. Nothing is that much visible. So now if we change our multiply value to a large value like 150, it's actually going to look very different, because it now actually uses the values of our color ramp, right? So let's change the density of our smoke and it'll just decrease that. We can worry about the smoke later and keep this at 0. And now we can go back to those color ramps and actually start worrying about the actual flame. So I'm going to leave a little bit of smoke in there, not too much. So set this at, in the end, at like 1 or 2, maybe a little bit more. But for now, 0, worry about those color ramps. So now when we change this slider, you can see the black changes how much the outside of the fire is visible. So that is basically the smoke density attribute that's being used, and we can add a new one, change this to a dark gray color or a little bit darker. There we go, and then we can get some nice color change in the middle as well, so you can really see that in the center the fire is transparent, and then there's a small layer of fire visible and a small layer that is then again not visible. So the top is the flame. We can change more values of this, but now it's going to look more like an actual flame. So you can just see me here playing around with those values in the color ramp. And that's basically all you do with volumes. It's a lot playing with color ramps, and don't worry about just trying new stuff, right? Add more points in there, remove points, slide points where you want them, and just find out what it does to the look of your flame and try to achieve the look that you want. So once again, I'm still not quite happy with the look. So I'm changing the resolution divisions to 256 just to get a little bit more information, more detail in our smoke and fire. We are going to have to run this one more time. in order to get those results. So it's going a little bit slower. So it's going like at 1 frame per few seconds. But you can see that's already looking a little bit more detailed. And the real struggle will be once this fire hits the floor, then Blender is going to have a little bit of issues calculating what the fire is going to do once it collides with the floor. But that's going to be fine. So for now, it's working quite all right. And you can see it now slowing down by quite a lot. And we're just going to hope that this at some point it's going to start. So what I did, I was just ending the recording for a second, and I am now back. Because it took way too long to keep recording. So now it is at frame 25. You can see there's some nice stuff going on. But you can also see that there is an issue. Right and left are looking different, right? Right, we changed all of those values of the flame. So we changed the velocity, the Z velocity, and also the vorticity of the actual flame. And we have to make sure that we get those changes that we want. So keep moving those sliders until you get what you want. I can't stress it enough. I'm also just trying new stuff here. So I've made fire before, of course, and stuff like that. But those kind of beams coming from shoes, they just need to look a little bit different than actual shoes. So I'm just playing around here with color ramps until I get what I want. And we might even need an additional color ramp, because you can see that we've got some areas in between of those bright values that are just not filled with fire. All right? So we're going to have to find a way to get that in there. And it seems to be not working with just 2 color ramps. So I'm actually going to select that one, Shift D, duplicate it, and Shift A, and let's add another math node. Let's swipe that in between there. Set it to multiple right away, multiply, so we don't have the same issue. Connect the color to the bottom socket and the density to the socket of the color ramp. And then let's set this back to add, actually. So because we are setting that to add, we can maybe get some of those values back that are being lost in between the bright spots. And you can see that it works. Although it looks a little bit weird, maybe. Once again, trying stuff out there. Actually, I like the way this looks a bit better already. So we at least have some new values in between of those bright spots, right? So right now I'm just looking at what we've done. So what we can still change. So I'm adding another color ramp. Let's Shift D, color ramp, and Shift A, and another math node right in between those final 2. And let's connect that to the bottom socket once again, and let's connect the flame to the top. We may be able to switch those 2 points, so move the black to the right. Doesn't really look well, we're going to move back. So set this back to another value. Maybe we can use subtract. That could work. It looks quite interesting, actually. So there's so much you can do with color ramps to get a way the flame looks. Maybe we'll move it all the way to the left. Let's see. Interesting. Move it back to the right. A little bit more interesting. There's still quite a large change in values between the bright spots, right? But it does look nice. So for now, we can actually run with this. But I think we should make some changes in the thruster. So select that emission object. And let's just make some changes right there. So we've got those flame values, and we've also got the emission. So the surface emission basically defines how much your object emits. So we're going to 0.5 that instead of 1 to create a little bit of a smaller source, and also set the source to 0, change that velocity. And we can try to set the flame rate maybe a little bit higher. Set this to 3. Just so that the flame moves a little bit faster. Now select your smoke domain, and there's some vorticity in our fire that I don't like. It has to be a thruster, it has to be hard, so I'm looking for the vorticity volume value of the fire. So open the fire tab, There is the vorticity at the third option, and I'm going to set this to 0. I don't want there to be any kind of weird noise in my fire, at least not that much. So right now, I think that should already try to run this first. So let's go and change that resolution by 1 step. There we go. Move it back. You can always do that. And move your timeline back to the start. And now we're going to play this again. And like before, it can take some time. So I'm just cutting. And we're back. And you can see there's some differences in left and right foot. And there's a very easy explanation right there. And that's simply because we only made those changes to the right foot. Right, so there is a difference right now. And at least we can now check to see why those differences exist. We can also see what we like better. So in the right foot, there is just, at this point, there's not enough fire, but it looks way better than the left, right? Because there's just much less vorticity. And let's check out how it looks in the rendered view with our shader applied. It's going to have to load for a little second, and that's because I'm playing the animation right now. That's my bad. You shouldn't play an animation and have it in render. That's just going too slow. So I'm stopping it right away before it gets too laggy. But you can really see the difference in left and right here. So the left foot is prior to the changes we made in the emitter object, and the right foot is the changes post. So the left one, obviously the right one has a little bit of a higher flame rate right now, so it's changing quicker into smoke, so there's less fire. The left one almost touches the ground, but the right one has less vorticity, so I really like that. Okay. So those changes in the right foot, left foot, compared to each other, we want the right foot to be the same as the left foot, right? So this one is just better than the left one. So we're just going to duplicate that entire thing. But first, set the flame rate down a little bit because it's not even touching it right now, the ground, and I want it. So let's change that to 1.5. Somewhere in the middle should be amazing. That's pretty much the only thing that we have to change right now to get what we want. The rest is completely fine. So now we can actually delete that first one. We don't need it anymore. And we can just select the right one and duplicate it, move it back. Don't worry about those weird changes in the volumetrics. Just go to your resolution divisions in the domain and change it. And now we have to run the simulation once again. So I just did that real quick, and we are now at 19 frames. We can move it a little bit further as well. So we have a little bit of feedback on the floor there. So a little bit of collision, and that's exactly what I wanted. And we've got the thrusters that don't completely just touch the floor, but they almost do. So I like the way this looks. I'm going to add the smoke density, because I really want to see some smoke there coming off from the floor. And I still not really like the way this fire looks. Shift A, color ramp to the top, density to the factor, and I'm going to use this for the density of this, the principal volume. So the actual smoke density, math node in between, set to multiply, and change this value to 20. You can really see the differences, and that's because we still have to change those sliders. We have to move them a little bit to the left, I guess, to get some of that value back. And I just want to create some custom cutoff, right? So just move that to the left a little bit more, get a hard contrast between the two, set the value a little bit higher. We can really see the smoke, set it to 100, and that's looking dope. That's looking really nice, some nice detail, and change this to a little bit darker maybe. Yeah, something like that is looking fine. Okay, so let's go back to that fire. It still looks too much like fire in my opinion. Right, so I feel like one of the reasons it doesn't really look like thrusters is because of the color. It's too much of a fire color. I want it to be a little bit more yellowish. So just change the black body tint. And I feel like we need some kind of a bluish color to go against those reds a little bit. So you can see that it also changes the intensity a little bit. But let's just try to find something that suits the thrusters a little bit more. And I think something like this is already more like something we're looking for. We can up this value of the intensity, not that much, maybe down to like, let's say 500, about there. It's looking nice. And it's still, let's set this back to 1000, by the way, just for default value. And right now it's still not really the way I want it to be. So I'm messing around with those color ramp sliders a little bit more. Maybe swipe it to the right. It does add some intensity, but not how I want it. Add another point and make it black, just so we can maybe try and get some more interesting details in our thrusters. Ooh, yes. That is looking way better. The way this looks like it's just starting off a little bit rough for the start off. And I really like the way this looks, actually. So we're going to keep that. So it's all about playing with like color ramps here, because that's just the way how we can cut off some of that fire and get us some new looks, and looks that we really like. So I'm just playing around a little bit more to see what everything does now, because we've got 4 color ramps going right now. So each of those things will, of course, change the look of our fire. And I'm just trying to find if we can make it look a little bit nicer. Even nicer, yes. So I think this is already looking quite nice. The bottom one is the one that changes the most, I feel like. So I'm just going to go back to that and try it and have a little bit of a different look still. You can see me just being very picky on how this fire looks, and that's just because I enjoy playing with those values. So you should probably just do the same to get the look that you want. But right now I'm quite satisfied. I'm not going to go into too much detail any longer. We've got 4 color ramps that we're using to change this flame, so there's just a lot of time that we can spend there. But right now it's looking nice. It's looking like he's just popping off. It's just starting up, and that's nice. So if you want this to be rendered out, which is what we can do now, is I'm only changing the max samples to 512, because that should be plenty to render this out. And now we can just press render, a render image. Actually, I'm going to change this color of the smoke real quick. I think it was too dark, so I'm just making it a bit lighter. Just a personal preference, personal touch, maybe a bit yellowish as well. Render image, and we're going to look at the final image. Let's see how long this takes. Can I just wait this out with you guys, or should I pause it for a second? I think I'm going to have to pause. It's going quite slow there. And there is the final render. 512 samples. It's looking quite nice, actually. I really like the way this turned out. But there are some values that I want to change. So go to the Compositing tab right there. Click Use Nodes. Swap this to the left. And we're going to left click, shift left click, sorry. So our viewer appears. Shift left click on that render layer node. Shift A, search for a bright contrast node. Swap it in between. And up the contrast a little bit, because it was just a little bit dull. We want it to be nice and hard in contrast. So about 2.3. Brightness, change it back to 0. Shift A, hue, saturation value, and just up the saturation a little. Actually, let's move that down, because we can move some of the yellowish out of the flame without losing that much red. And I think that is the final touch that we actually needed. So you don't have to change it a lot, so 0.956 in this case works nice for me. I like that a lot. And make sure to connect that node to your Composite tab as well, so that when you go back to your render, it is the same as your viewer. Save it and name it low poly Iron Man or anything you want. There you go. Alright, so with the render done, there's only one step left to do, and it's going to be an interesting one. So there's this program on this website called Mixamo, and I'll show you right now. I've already uploaded the character, but we'll do the steps in just a second. Mixamo basically lets you upload your own character that you made in any 3D program. Doesn't have to be Blender, and you can basically add a rig, so a skeleton to your character in order to create animations. And Mixamo has these basic animations, so that's included with the website, completely free. that you can just use. So for example, if you want to make your Iron Man fly, you can just search for a flying animation. If you want to make him do a hurricane kick, beautiful, then you can just make him do a hurricane kick. So that's all. You can basically just select and it will apply it to your character. So I'll show you how to get your character in Mixamo right now. Alright, so we're back in Blender, so we already got the renders and stuff, we got the materials set up, so we're going to start worrying about the skeleton now. So, let's start by selecting all the objects that you want to export. So hold shift and just select everything. And make sure that there isn't something in the background selected. You can see it by the orange outline. Just deselect it, so hold shift and select everything. You can always double check if you have selected everything by just pressing G and then moving those objects. You can see that I missed the entire abdomen. So let's select that as well. And this little triangle too. Alright, so if you have everything selected, you can just press File, Export. And let's do an OBJ. Works fine in most cases. And then we can also set this to selected only. There we go. So it doesn't include the background and stuff. And let's just also go for material groups. I'm not sure if it's going to work with Mixamo, but let's just select it. And then you can export it with the name you have. So Iron Man stylized.obj, export it. Should be very quick. It's quite a simple model. Now, let's go to your browser and let's start clean. So we go to mixamo.com. And each time you upload your character, it will save it for the next time because it is dependent on your account. So I will log out. So we have the same starting point. So this is what your website should look like. Just sign up for free if you don't have an account. If you have an account, log in. I log in with my Gmail most of the times. There we go. Logging in. So it's already saved for me probably. So the model will already be there. There it is. It is a little bit in the ground, but that doesn't matter. So what you're going to do, it basically shows you a default character if you start it up the first time. It's the default Mixamo character. So we're going to press upload character. If you can't see it, make sure you are in the character tab right there on the top. Upload character, select character file, and then we can see our OBJ file. And make sure not to select your MTL file, which only contains the information for materials, but select your stylized OBJ file. So open it up and it should take just a second to load. There we go. It's loading. There is our Iron Man model and it isn't really in the right direction. So we're going to rotate this on the Y-axis a few times. So it's facing straight to us. Press next and now is where the fun begins. So in Mixamo, there is an auto rigger. So in Blender, if you have to rig it completely yourself. You have to add bones and connect the bones to a certain part of the mesh. In Mixamo, you can just apply these pointers. So left click and just drag it to where the chin is. Same for the wrists. You have symmetry enabled by default, so you can just swipe these to the wrists, elbows. There we go. Knees, and it doesn't even have to be perfect. And the last one to the groin. There we go. And just press next. And now it's going to rig your character. It says it can take up to 2 minutes depending on the size of your file and the amount of details and stuff. This should take a small second. And in Mixamo, they will automatically smooth everything. So we will lose our flat faces, but that's only going to be for Mixamo. Once we import it back in Blender, those faces will all be straight again as we like. So here is the rigged character and it will start with a default animation right away. So it's just looking around a little bit, but you can see that it works. And you can also enable the skeleton view, which doesn't really work in this case. I think because our character is quite a small size. And then we can press next and next. And then we can see our character in the right view. A little bit through the floor, but that's okay. And then we can go to the animations tab on the top. And we can search for an animation. And I want to make him fly. So we can search for fly. And there are a few animations we can choose of. Even though a lot of them are not actual flying animations. So we're just going to pick the first one, flying. There we go. And now we can just select download. And there are a few other options that you can select as well. You can, for example, over exaggerate the movement if you turn this to overdrive. And you can, I think, widen the arms, the legs, and you can also change the frames, but I'm just going to keep this as default. So just select download, and now there are a few options that you can choose of. I'm just going to keep this as an FBX, it mostly works fine. And I'm going to do it with skin as well, otherwise you will only get the armature, and the rest is all fine. So just download your file, and it will save this as the name of the animation, so it's going to be flying. In my case, flying 3, because I've already tested this before. Alright, so now we go back to Blender. We can just select File, Import, FBX. There we go. And then find your animation. So flying 3 in my case, import it. And now it is there. It is very small, so we're going to have to press S and just swipe that up by a lot. There we go. Something like that. And then I'm going to press numpad 0, go into camera view, scroll out a little bit, and just move that into the camera view once again. So if we want this to be somewhere in the camera, we can just swipe it in. This is just to show you how to work with Mixamo. I'm not going to change like the entire scene, it's going to take too much time. But now you know how to import it. And for example, if we go to rendered view now, you can see that's there. And it is in front of our other Iron Man, but the materials are lost. So that's a little bit of a pity, but we can easily get that back, especially since we have a splitted up model anyway. So what we're going to do is just select the legs of your initial version, press Ctrl L, link materials. There we go. Do the same for the other parts. So the chest, Ctrl L, link materials, select the head, hold shift. Select your first head, Ctrl L, link materials. Same for the face. There we go. Same for the eyes as well. Should already be there actually. And then for the hands is part of the chest, abdomen. Hold shift, Ctrl L, link materials. And there should be one more piece, the triangle right there. So select that one, the other one. Let's see. Ctrl L, link materials. There we go. I think we still have to define the material in the eyes because it is part of one object. So select your face, press tab, and it will move back to its original location. So make sure to go over there and press 3 and select the faces that you want to be the emission material again. Hold shift, just select those faces, select the material right there and hit assign. There we go. Now press tab again and it should be back. So now we can hide, for example, our initial models, but we can also just check it out right now. So let's go to the rendered view and have a look. There we go. So materials are now completely back like they are supposed to be. And we can rotate and transform this new model by simply selecting the armature and press R, Z. And it's going to rotate it around the initial position of our model, which is a little bit to the right because we are not on frame 1 of the animation, but we are on frame 24. So the animation is already running for a little while. And that's because we want to be a few frames in for this smoke simulation. So what we're going to do is just rotate it around the Z-axis, RZ, something like this, and then move it back into the frame. It's just an Iron Man popping into frame, right? Looks great. Now let's render this out. Render image, and let's see how it looks like. I'll be back in a second. All right, so there are still a few issues that were not taken care of. For example, the arms materials are now all red, and that is because we didn't define which part of the arms has to be the metal or the gold again. So we can redo that. So just press tab on your object and select all the faces that you want to be gold. So hold shift, double click, and keep doing this until you have everything selected. You have to do the same for the other side as well, of course. There we go. This one too. And then just select your gold material and hit assign, just like that. We should probably do the same for the legs then. Press tab and let's go to the legs, press 3 and double click, hold shift and double click all those faces that you want to be gold. There we go. You can always hit Control Z if you select something that's wrong. This and this is one. This is going to be gold. And I want this knee part to be the initial metal. So hold shift and select all of it. And select the metal scratched. Hit assign. We forgot one face right there. And we want to do the same for the other knee, of course. There we go. Select it all. It's not that big of a deal. Not that much work to do. And select the material and hit assign. There we go. Let's see if the face has the proper material. Should be good. And I'm just going to move this back a little bit. So press G and X, and G and Z. And let's just move it behind our character or right next to it. So it catches some of that initial lighting that we set up as well. We can always move the camera a little bit. So select it and press G and Z. Move that up a little bit. Just like that. And now let's render it out again. Alright, the render is done. You can see that all the materials are now applied correctly. And it basically meshes the initial model of Iron Man. So it's just a little bit of an extra work that you have to do to reapply some of these materials. But that isn't that much of a deal right now. So, in this tutorial we've learned how to model Iron Man in a low poly style. Quite an interesting style if you ask me. We've learned how to make a smoke simulation look like the way you want it to look like and get the material right. And we've even added this character in Mixamo and created a rig for a character to get it animated. So there's a lot of information in one tutorial, I'd say. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it as well. And I'll see you in the next one.
Now I hope that was helpful. If you like free access to any of our Skillshare classes or want the model we use here, simply join our email family and you can simply request access to the class or the model completely free anytime you'd like. We've got classes on everything from Rick and Morty to Venom, Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus, and much, much more. The link is in the description. I can't wait to hear from you.